From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and yours are sheltering in place in a safe environment, and we look forward to greeting you back in the yacht club just as soon as conditions permit. Our speaker today first conceived of the idea of recreating the original circumnavigation of Africa by the Phoenicians as recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus. In 2019, the Phoenicians Before Columbus Expedition was launched, and our speaker began to examine whether the Phoenicians could have reached America before the Vikings or Columbus. They sailed the Phoenicia across the Atlantic in a fun tale that Philip Beale is going to tell us. Philip is an adventurer, a maritime historian, enthusiast, and an author. And Philip, you have a new book that's just about to be published. We want to hear about that at the end. But please tell us all about the Phoenicians before Columbus.
Good afternoon, Ron, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to present to you this afternoon.
Tell me a little bit about your own childhood. Where did you first get on a sailboat? What kind of boat was it? Where were you? How old were you?
Well, I did a little bit of sailing at school, just on dinghies and stuff. But the first real sailing boat I got on was called the Eye of the Wind. I got on it. It's a tall ship, a brigantine, and I was 18 years old, and I got a chance to sail on it on an expedition called Operation Drake. And I sailed on it from Fiji to Papua New Guinea across the Western Pacific. And of course, that whole thing changed my life. And because of that is, why I've been involved in, sailing expeditions ever since.
Philip, tell me about your education.
So I was brought up in Devon, the area where Sir Francis Drake and other great English sailors, were born. And so I went to school in North Devon, to a boarding school from the age of 13 to when I left as a 17-year-old. And then I went on this Operation Drake expedition, which was my first sailing expedition on a tall ship. And that's what really hooked me. And later I went to university. I joined the Royal Navy. And then what I wanted to do with these Kon-Tiki type expeditions. So I left the Navy and earned some money. And then eventually, a little bit late in life, really, I decided I was going to undertake my first Kon-Tiki expedition, which was a voyage across the Indian Ocean, looking at how Asian influence reached Madagascar and Africa. And when I had done that, I then became very interested in how the first traders had engaged with Africa. And I sort of, if you like, discovered the Phoenicians, and nobody had really looked at the Phoenicians from a replica ship, from a maritime point of view. And ever since 2005, I've been involved with, if you like, promoting and understanding the Phoenicians' contribution to maritime history, really.
So when I was a little boy, I learned all about the Phoenicians, and as I mentioned earlier, I got very enthusiastic because they were such powerful seafarers, and they could go all the way across the Med and down the coast of Africa. And I remember learning all about that and thinking, they're the original guys. Before the Greeks, there were the Phoenicians, who were these really powerful seafaring entities. And then the Greeks figured out how to do the trimarines, and they could, with the underwater prod that would sink boats in front of it and stuff like that. So they got good at the naval battles. But the Phoenicians always seemed to me to be like the explorers, the real genuine adventurers from the Eastern Mediterranean. And so, do you remember the moment when all of a sudden you got that the Phoenicians were these cool ancient mariners? Where were you? How did you know that?
I started to engage with the Phoenicians. I was telling this story about the expedition to Africa, the Indonesian expedition, to a professor at Oxford, and he sort of asked me, well, Philip, what are you going to do next? And I sort of ummed and ahed, and then mentioned about the Phoenicians. And he said, well, that's the expedition that you've got to do. You've got to recreate the voyage that Herodotus talks about, the Phoenicians making this first circumnavigation of Africa. And he said, I'll help you with some of the arrangements for doing that. And I walked out of the room and the meeting realizing that I'd committed myself to undertake the Phoenician expedition. So that was 2005. And the story goes on, sort of thing.
So you were hooked. How was it?
Yeah, I was hooked. And I think I'm one of those kind of people that when you say you're going to do something, I do it. I might not always be able to do it very quickly. It might take time, but I felt once I'd committed to it, I couldn't then, walk away from it. So yeah, I was on the hook.
Oh, we're all ears. Great.
So let me just set the scene for you just very quickly before I get into the real presentation. I'm just showing you now a chart of the Mediterranean, and the Phoenicians were people that lived primarily in the Eastern Mediterranean. They dominated the several city-states in the Eastern Mediterranean, from Tyre, Sidon, Beirut, Byblos, and Arwad. And they were incredible people.
Where's headquarters? Show us headquarters.
Yeah, so headquarters is really Tyre. Tyre was the main city center there in the east of the Mediterranean. Because they lived on this land which was not very productive in the Eastern Mediterranean, the sea, if you like, became their garden. They became expert traders. They were also very inventive. So, they invented the purple dye that has always been subsequently associated with royalty and religion. And in its day, it was worth more than its weight in gold. That was one of the things they did, but they did many other things. For example, they discovered how to blow glass. They introduced wine and olive oil to Europe. And from a sailing point of view, they discovered the pole star, and the Greeks, who were their sworn enemies, said that the Phoenicians were the best sailors of their time and the first sailors to sail at night and outside of the sight of land. So they were incredible people. And then from about the 9th century, they founded Carthage.
9th century BC. 9th century BC.
Yes, 9th century BC. They founded Carthage, and Carthage became the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. And all of their Atlantic adventures really then stemmed from Carthage. And that, of course, upset Rome. And not before the Carthaginians under Hannibal marched his elephants over the Alps and nearly destroyed Rome, but didn't finish Rome off. So then there were 3 Punic Wars, and Carthage was destroyed. The diktat from the Senate in Rome was Carthage must be destroyed. And in 146 BC, Carthage was leveled. And basically after that, the Phoenician culture and history died out, and Roman influence basically took over.
I heard that when they leveled Carthage and destroyed Carthage, did they also pour salt into the land so that you couldn't grow anything there for decades? What happened how did they destroy Carthage?
They primarily destroyed it by a military campaign, but they actually, tore down all the buildings and the buildings, and they basically flattened it. But there is the legend, as you say, that they put salt into the land.
Tilled salt into the soil is what I remember reading as a young guy. Yeah.
That is the legend. I don't know whether it's true or not, but that's certainly the legend. So they say a civilization that lasted about 1,000 years.
What's interesting is that most people don't realize that Carthage and Hannibal were really they were like the product of an offshoot of, and sort of the genetic inheritors of the whole Phoenician culture and seafaring culture.
Yes, that's right. And again, legend has it that, Carthage was developed by Dido, or Queen Elisa. She was the daughter of the king of Tyre, but she fell out with her father. And legend has it, with, I think, 7 or 8 sea captains, went to Cyprus and then founded Carthage and built the city there. But definitely, I use the terms Carthaginians and Phoenicians sort of interchangeably as one and the same thing, because culturally they were virtually identical. And in genetic format, yes, they certainly, Carthaginians derived predominantly from the Phoenicians. I just wanted to show you this rock drawing from some caves in southern Spain that look out over the Bay of Gibraltar, and it's been dated to about 900 BC. When I saw this, I immediately thought that if there's a ship with a large sail and oars that's looking out over the Straits of Gibraltar, and this is what the local inhabitants are seeing, then clearly there was a lot of trade going on through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Atlantic, and therefore there must be a strong possibility with these kind of ships that they would have reached the Americas. So this rock drawing is really my inspiration for the Phoenicians Before Columbus expedition. My objective was to get the Phoenicia to Carthage in modern-day Tunisia, and then sail it out of the Mediterranean and to call into Cadiz, which was one of the great Phoenician ports on the Atlantic, down to Essaouira or Mogador, which is the ancient name for the Phoenician trading post in the south of Morocco, then across to the Canary Islands, and then really just to let the ship go and see where we end up. There was no prefixed course as to where we were going to end up. So that was the plan, basically. The design of the Phoenicia is based on a 6th century wreck that was found near Marseille. It's called the Jules Verne 7, and the professor who excavated it gave us permission to study it and look at how the construction of the ribs and the planks were all joined together so that we could make basically an authentic replica of a Phoenician ship. And this research was done between sort of 2006 to 2007. And you can see here at the bottom of the screen, the starting of the first few planks and the keel. It's 18 feet wide, 65 feet long. And with the ballast, she's got a tonnage of 50 tons. So there's 20 tons of ballast in her.
So 50 tons, in other words, 100,000 pound boat. And what kind of wood was it constructed out of?
There are 5 types of timber. The 5 types are the Aleppo pine, or as the Lebanese would say, Lebanese cedar for the keel. There's Mediterranean pink pine for the planking. The mast and the boom is made from the Cypress fir, which is the most flexible timbers in the ancient world, for obvious reasons why we needed the flexible timbers. We've obviously got the wooden pegs that are put in. I think if you just see along the top of this plank that we've got here, we've got effectively mortise and tenon joints, and then the dowels are driven in through these pegs, and then once the boat's in the water, the timbers will plim up and will make a very robust hull. So the Phoenicians really invented the mortise and tenon joint. In fact, the Romans called it the Phoenician joint. And up until this time in history, these kind of boats would have been sewn together with a rope and would have been very flexible. And of course, the rope would tend to rot in the seawater. So the Phoenicians, one of the reasons for their success is that they evolved the first rigid hull. And this is how they did it with this mortise and tenon joints.
How do they bore out those holes? Nowadays, we've got electric battery operated drills that, do a perfect job of boring out. How do they drill those holes to put the pegs in?
They would have had a little pointed stone, which they would have inserted into a piece of wood, and they would have turned that. They would have turned it to help get the hole. But the other thing which is relevant here is the Phoenicians were the first boat builders, or pretty much the first, to use iron nails. So what they did, they would have had some iron implements, and on the main ribs, they didn't use a lot of iron nails, but they drove the iron nails in from the outside into the ribs to give it more strength. So, they did have some good tools, but they certainly didn't have what we had, which was some electric drills to make some nice holes for these from dowels. And the dowels are made from olive wood, which was the hardest wood in the ancient world. So that's what they used for that. And then the ribs were Mediterranean oak and sometimes walnut. We used both, mainly Mediterranean oak. And the boat builders went into the forest to find the right shaped timbers so that they could get the curvature for the hull. This construction of Phoenicia is plank first. It's not clinker at all. This is edge on edge plank construction, and the whole vessel is pretty much built plank first before the ribs are inserted. And so the advantage of that, not having a clinker type boat, is they didn't need caulking like the Arab boats or the dowels. They didn't need to stuff the cotton wool in and find resin, because the hull was already really fairly watertight straight away. And here you can see when they're putting the ribs into the boat for the extra strength. And then, as I mentioned, they drive in the nails from outside.
Given how difficult it would have had to make steam in those days, did they steam these ribs, or did they cut them in shape, or what?
Yes, our boat builders steamed them. Some of them they cut to shape, and they selected them from the forest to get the right shape. But for the planks, they steamed them. And given that the Phoenicians, had invented glass blowing, as I mentioned, I think they would have probably understood how to steam timbers as well.
How fast are these boats going when they're sailing?
Downwind, with a wind just off the sort of port or starboard stern, that's where you're going to get 6 or 7 knots, which it feels like it's supersonic in this boat. That even that low speed.
How close to the wind were you pointing when you went to weather in the boats?
Up to about 15 degrees in front of the beam. And beyond that, you might think you're going into the wind, but you're not. You're just, crabbing sideways.
And they have internal ballast? What kind of internal ballast?
They would have used rocks and boulders, some of which would have been for anchoring, but we actually used sort of steel plate. The other thing is they would have used some of their cargo. So if they were transporting tin, for example, they would have used tin ingots as part of their ballast and their goods. But typically, if you find a Phoenician wreck, you'll find a lot of large boulders surrounding the wreck, which is their ballast.
And what was their metallurgy like? They could make iron, and what else could they craft?
They could make bronze as well. So at the beginning of the Bronze Age, so this is where they needed tin. They had plenty of supplies of copper from Cyprus, but they needed tin, and tin was short, in very short supply in the Eastern Mediterranean at that time. But that's where they got the tin from the Atlantic. And there's been a recent, if you like, discovery of some tin ingots from a wreck in Israel, and with the sort of the DNA signature, if you like, of the tin, that has given that they've identified that tin as coming from Cornwall and Devon in the southwest of England. So that's a journey of some 3,000 miles. So huge, these Phoenicians transported tin and metals huge distances, because in the ancient world, the Middle East was very short of metals. So this is the Phoenicia when she was first launched, just to plumb her up and the like. So this is after about 7 months of boat building. There's a couple more months of work to do on her and to fit her out, but this is when she was launched. So that's really the story of Phoenicia, and I'll just show you a little clip of her actually sailing so you get the full idea.
Great. Wow.
So this is the Phoenicia as she was coming back into the Straits of Gibraltar, into Gibraltar. And in a minute, you'll see, we're dodging a few ferries and the like, and you'll see the Straits of Gibraltar, sorry, the Rock of Gibraltar in the background.
So the tiller goes athwart ships. Are there two rudders?
Yeah, we've got 2 quarter rudders, and you can see the sail here. I mean, it's like really like a large spinnaker that we're flying. So it's quite tricky to keep it, in the correct position. And what we're doing is we're sort of playing around here a little bit with the shape of the sail. But the other thing which is interesting is the Phoenicians invented, if you like, a system of reefing, so that, and they were the first to do that. So there are these brailing lines that come from the top of the yard back to the stern, which enables the sail to be controlled like a Venetian blind, if you like.
Right. They could furl it up, you're saying. They'd furl the sail up?
Yeah, so we can furl the sail up without moving the yard. And to think that they were doing that 2,500–3,000 years ago is quite incredible. And you can see all the lines there that we're pulling to change the shape of the sail.
What's this typical crew? What's your crew size for the expeditions?
So 12 is good for the crew size. That's how she was built. I just wanted to spend a little time on really talking about what the ancients knew. I've just selected a few of them. I mean, everybody knows Pythagoras' name and what he did, but he was a Phoenician. Aristotle was the first person to scientifically prove that the world was round, it was a sphere. And he observed that from different positions on land, you could see different constellations, and therefore the world wasn't flat. And he also observed, of course, that as a boat goes over the horizon, it's clear that the world has curvature, if you like, because it doesn't suddenly just fall off the edge of the world. Eratosthenes was one of the most intelligent scholars of his time. He was the chief librarian at the library in Alexandria, and he worked out through a clever experiment the size of the world, which he estimated to be 25,000 miles, and he was within 2 or 3% of the actual measurement. So that was a huge achievement to be able to calculate it. I should mention Hipparchus. He was really, if you like, the father of trigonometry, and he managed to plot some 8,000 towns and cities, and as well as observing some 800 stars, which he plotted, he was able to create a grid for latitude and longitude. And he came to give us an explanation of the, if you like, the longitude of the known world in ancient times. That is quite an important clue to the fact that the ancients knew that there were lands and islands in the Atlantic, which I'll explain in just a second. Ptolemy and Marinus of Tyre, they came along and they recalculated Eratosthenes' circumference of the world, And instead of making it about 25,000 miles, they significantly reduced it to 18,000 miles. So it was about 25% smaller than the reality. And Ptolemy then, because of that, he reduced the size of 1 degree and made the world a much smaller place. Hipparchus is known for the accuracy and the truth and the detail of what he did. He was a real stickler for detail. When we look at what he calculated, it's clear that the world is about 3,500 miles longer in terms of longitude than Ptolemy had estimated. Now, the known world in the ancient time was from China, from the capital of China in the east, to what Hipparchus said was the Blessed Islands. The Blessed Islands were generally considered to be the Canary Islands. That's where most of these ancient scholars subsequently thought the world really ended. That's only the knowledge they had. But when we take what Hipparchus said, there was another 3,500 miles. So actually, he indicates that there's knowledge of islands much further to the west. One author has said, a modern day author, a professor of mathematics, if you look at Ptolemy's map, you can see that he's cheating, because the top left, you've got the United Kingdom. He almost plots the United Kingdom from east to west rather than north to south. And this is because he's trying to fake, if you like, the true longitude of the world. And just to elaborate a little bit, there's about 5 quotations in the ancient literature that talks about a voyage from Spain of around 40 nights to the west, and that there were islands, many, they called these islands the Hesperides Islands, to the west of the Canary Islands. So this is the basis for my theory that the ancients knew, and there are glimpses that the ancients knew about, as we say, the lands to the west.
So what's the distance from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean?
Well, interestingly, about 3,500 miles. So it's this gap that Hipparchus talks about. We look at this little illustration here. Strabo, who was the sort of father of modern day geography, observed that the Phoenicians had 300 settlements down the Atlantic coast from Portugal, Spain, and Morocco. Now, even if that's an exaggeration, the point is that the Phoenicians had lots of ships in the Atlantic, and they were indeed the first recorded sailors to sail in the Atlantic. So there's quite a lot of evidence there. The Phoenicians were very active, but the one thing you might be wondering is, why don't we know more about the Phoenicians in the Atlantic? And the point I would make here is, imagine tomorrow if all of a sudden all the hard disks and USB keys and smartphones that we have were suddenly destroyed. Our civilization would go back probably 50 years. Now, my contention is that's exactly what happened in the ancient world. We've talked a bit about Carthage and the destruction. Now, Carthage had one of the great libraries, and that was destroyed in the rout by the Romans. But worse than that, about 150 to 200 AD, the library at Alexandria was destroyed, and it was the equivalent of about 100,000 books were destroyed. I mean, they had about 150 librarians there. And of course, when I say the equivalent, these were all scrolls. So there were about 40,000 scrolls. So this knowledge was lost. So my argument is it any wonder that the ancient sources of what civilization knew about voyages in the Atlantic was lost? Because the 2 great sources of information were destroyed within a few hundred years of each other.
And this was the Romans who did both?
Yeah, the Romans did both.
And did the Romans do this because they wanted to get rid of the civilization and it sort of cornerstones of knowledge, or what was their purpose?
Yes, they basically wanted, the complete destruction of a culture. Now I wanted to turn to, if we were Phoenicians and we were sailing off of the coast of Spain or Morocco, we've got the Gulf Stream as like an elevator that would take us across the Atlantic. So this chart was produced by Benjamin Franklin, and he had observed that mail ships got to England more quickly than they returned, and then started to document the Gulf Stream. So everything is in favor of the Phoenicians being able to get across the Atlantic quite easily. They had the knowledge, they knew where the pole star was, they had the ships, everything they had was in their favor, and they were far more, better prepared than any other group in the ancient world to have done this voyage.
We thought the Norwegians, Norwegians, they weren't there until 1,500 years later. They were there around 900 AD or so, right? When are we talking about the Norwegians coming across?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The Vikings settled Newfoundland in the 9th century, and they've now dated one of those settlements to 1021 AD. But what we're talking about, of course, is something probably around 300 BC is probably the height of Carthaginian power.
So your point is that's all well and good to be there at 1021 AD, but you've got some theories that the Phoenicians were there 1,300 years earlier.
That's right. That's the context. The Vikings did a great job, but probably were pipped to the post by the Phoenicians. There's little bits of evidence, but I would admit to the fact we right now do not have the sort of silver bullet of evidence like the Vikings have, but we're closing in on it, shall we say. Let me tell you then about the voyage. And you can see we were always a little bit worried that the head of the mast was a little bit on the thin side. Didn't really make much difference for us. So we always hung the boom and the yard fairly low down. As long as it was, reasonably above the cabin, we could get enough wind.
And what kind of material did you make the sail out of?
We had two. One was made of hemp, which was obviously available in the ancient world. And then, of course, we know that the Egyptians used cotton, of course. So hemp was the preferred source and stronger, but also cotton was used as well. But one thing that I would just mention on the boat, so we never had any electric winches or anything. Even the anchor, we pulled it by hand, and that would take 7 or 8 fairly strong bodies to pull up the anchor. So it was pretty hardcore sailing. And so everything was, traditional, even if some of the ropes were later sort of synthetic hemp, if you like. And the other thing is, the Egyptian boats would have a boom, if you like, along the foot of the sail, but the Phoenicians never had anything because they wanted to reef these sails by pulling, and you can see here, these 8 brailing lines coming over the top of the yard and back to the stern. Those are the lines that we can, so if the storm's coming, we can reef this sail up and just have like literally just a meter of sail. We don't need to drop the yard. We can just reef it up, keep out of harm's way whilst the storm goes through. And then as soon as it's gone, we can let the sail down again, but we don't actually have to lower the yard at all. The boat was previously in the United Kingdom. We had to get it to Tunisia, and we did quite a lot of the repairs and making a new sail. And you can see here repairs going on the sail as we got the boat to Tunisia. And we arrived there at the beginning of September 2019. The Tunisians were incredibly hospitable, and they liked the fact that we'd chosen Carthage as the starting point of the expedition, and recognized Carthage and the contributions, if you like, that the Tunisians' ancient culture contributed. And so we had a lot of support there, and a great send-off. And we had local schools contributing food and supplies to us, all sorts of support and help from the Tunisian authorities. And finally, the day came, September the 28th is when we left Carthage and sailed out of the Bay of Tunis and down the Mediterranean. As you can imagine, the crew, basically we had a sort of delivery crew who delivered the boat to Tunisia, and a lot of the crew members for the expedition came from the four corners of the world. But some had, a lot of sailing experience, and others had very little at all. So there were a few nervous people on board as we sailed out into the Bay of Tunis, and it was quite choppy, quite rough. So the boat was, moving around a bit. We left about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Personally, I prefer to leave in the morning, but on this occasion we had to. So about 1 o'clock at night, I was on the helm, and we were still in mobile phone sort of distance, signal distance. And I get this call from a guy who had been helping us called Mohammed. And he said, "Oh, Captain, I understand your boat is in trouble. What is happening? What is the problem?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean? What? I don't think there's any problem. It's choppy, but there's no problem." He said, "Oh, I've just had a distress call from one of the wives of your American crew member, saying that she's had an emergency signal to say the boat is in danger." So I'm sort of shocked. I said, "Well, no, we're fine. There's no problem. I don't know what's happening here." So I go and wake this guy up, a guy called Doug. I go and wake him up and say, "Doug, have you sent a message to your wife that we're in danger and the boat's, needs rescuing?" And he said, "No, Philip, I have got one of these GPS alarm systems, and I sent my wife a signal to say that everything's okay and we're underway." I said, "Well, I think the message she got was we're in danger, and had we not received this phone call, your alert would have, started an international search and rescue mission." Yeah, we'd only been sailing about 6 hours. We got into the night, and this thing had happened. And we then sailed down towards Cadiz. We had a worry about the mast, which we fixed. We did spend a few days in Gibraltar.
By the way, how are you navigating?
We've got a couple of guys who are interested in the stars and a little bit of observations going on there. But basically, we're navigating by GPS. We've got a chart plotter, and we've also got a satellite communication, because we're also sending photos and images back to our website, so that we've got several thousand followers who are, checking progress. This one here is the satellite dish. So we've got a Sailor 250, so that we can communicate with and send images back and emails back to our base. And then we've got a Raymarine radar dome there. Because it uses so much power, which is always short on a sailing boat, as you know, we only really use the radar if it's very stormy or cloudy, and we want to have a look out and see sort of 10, 20 miles out for container ships and ferries and things like that. We're not using the radar that much, other than, when there are visibility issues.
And on the port quarter, that does not appear to be a Phoenician red and blue flag back there.
Yeah, so the Phoenicia is a British registered ship. So we're flying the red ensign. We've come down from Cadiz down towards Morocco. The situation got quite tricky as we got towards Essaouira and Morocco. The entrance to the bay in Essaouira is quite narrow and rocks on either side, but we've got this strong wind blowing us. So we're quite nervous, or I was quite nervous, coming in late at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we couldn't see a leading light because of too many lights on the foreshore. So I had to have one person on the chart plotter seeing whether we were at a reasonable distance from the rocks. By the skin of our teeth, we get into the bay at Mogador, and then in the morning, the harbour authorities invite us round into the inner harbour with all the fishing boats. We get a great welcome from the people of Essaouira. Again, they're delighted that we've recognised their contribution to Phoenician history. And it's a most beautiful town. And you know you're there because of the smell of fish, because basically the whole harbour is full of these little fishing boats. And whilst we were there, the storm basically prevented these fishing boats going out. But in Essaouira, they process literally tons of sardines every day. In ancient times, it was a big port for Phoenician traders. I mean, basically, they were trading lots of African goods, but also metals from the Atlas Mountains were being shipped and then taken back to the Middle East. So there was quite a lot going on here in ancient times.
What was the total cost of this expedition?
Well, this particular one probably cost less than 100,000 because we already had the boat, and obviously the cost of building the boat and the infrastructure and the like was the big cost. But over the period of, since 2008, the cost would be in excess of $1 million, and some of that would have been, sponsored by individuals, corporations, and wherever we could, we borrowed. So our life-saving equipment, for example, our life rafts was sponsored by Viking life-saving equipment, the Danish company. So we've never had to pay for that, for example. And similarly, a lot of the other stuff was sponsored. We then sailed from Morocco via Tenerife in the Canary Islands, which, as I mentioned earlier, was evidence of Phoenician trade with the Canary Islands. And we got down to probably about 300 to 400 miles off of Cape Verde. We ended up much more in a southerly position than we thought we would. And this beautiful falcon decided to come and visit us, which was the first sort of visitor we had. And here is this falcon, and we looked after it for a couple of days, and it became a real, friend on the boat. Everybody wanted to know where it was and where it was feeding. Very sadly, though, one morning it flew off. We saw it dive for a fish, but it never recovered, and we didn't see it again. So sadly, we think this lovely falcon came to a watery end, but whilst he was on board the boat, he was a celebrity. The next sort of animal incident was we had all our fresh food and supplies on board. And one day, after about a week or so, one of my colleagues said that there were teeth marks appearing in some of the apples in the cabin. And we, to begin with, I sort of dismissed it. And I said, oh, it's probably a little mouse. It's not going to do any harm. Don't worry about it. But a couple of days later, we discovered that not only did this creature have a liking for apples, but it was also making holes in some of the containers that held our rice and our pasta and our dried foods. And it was clearly the fact that it could chew through these plastic containers meant that it was something more than a mouse. One night, one of our colleagues called Max, who was a bit of a joker, said he'd seen a rat run across the deck and he'd chased it, but he wasn't sure where it went. And we didn't really believe him, or we weren't sure about believing him because he was always joking around. We couldn't tell whether he was serious. And then the next night, he said he saw the same thing again. And we were sort of beginning to think that he was probably correct. And then he said he thought he felt it. He was sleeping on the deck and he thought he felt it in his hair. But anyway, I was doing the rounds one morning down below with a flashlight, and sure enough, I saw this rat jumping along on the containers of food. So I knew we had a rat. We tried all sorts of things. We made a couple of traps, but they were pretty pathetic. And at one point we thought if we started the generator and the engine, we could kill it with carbon monoxide. So we closed the hatches, we put the engines on for about 4 hours, and we thought, that would finish it off, but no, it didn't. In the end, our Brazilian friend Yuri, he built a proper rat trap. It has a sense of humor. You can see here it says Minnie Mouse Nightclub. And the first time he set it with some food, the rat went in it, ate the food, but the trap didn't work. But he fine-tuned it. And one morning, I went down below and I could see this thing was vibrating. So I told him when he came on watch, I think you got the rat, he's in your cage. And sure enough, he was. We then took this box out, tied a rope around it and dragged it behind the boat and drowned the rat. And Yuri was the hero. He was really the guy who saved the day, because the crew were beginning to get quite worried from the health worries of the rat.
How big was the rat? Give us dimensions.
Probably about 7 or 8 inches long. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough to be scary. Almost certainly it had come on board in Tenerife when we'd been doing a repair. We had a plank that we had opened up, and it had obviously hopped on board then, I think. So that was our story of, we called it Ratgate, and it certainly made the voyage interesting. So this is the Phoenician crew on Christmas Day. We've got myself here in the center. We've got my 2 Indonesian friends. One's a shipbuilder here and fisherman, Dearman. This is my nephew, Charlie. We've then got, this is Max, the guy who spotted the rat. This is Yuri from Brazil. This is Shema from the Lebanon. This guy is from Norway. And coming back here, we've got Remy, who's Lebanese. We've got David, who's a Scot. We've got Maren, who's a Dutch doctor, and she was our medical and food and hygiene officer. And then we've got here Steiner, who's his day job, if you like, is he is the skipper of a replica Viking vessel. So we had his experience to contribute. So the next part of our adventure, we had come in just north of Guadeloupe, and we took the decision that we would aim for the Dominican Republic. Originally, I thought we might end up in the British or American Virgin Islands or on the north coast of the Dominican Republic, but we ended up very much to the south, and we decided to head for Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. And at very short notice, because we hadn't planned it, the Dominican Republic Navy jumped in and said they would host us for our stay there and us making landfall. And they brought out the brass band and welcomed us to Santa Dominica, and they gave us some short presentations, and our Phoenicia boat was for a while alongside some of their naval ships, and we actually arrived in the Dominican Republic on the 31st of March. So we were actually able to go out on the town and enjoy the new year and celebrate our arrival. So it had taken us some 39 days to arrive in the Dominican Republic, very much the same as Columbus had taken on his first voyage. So similar sort of speed, really.
How close were you to where Columbus landed in his 40-day voyage?
Columbus originally landed in the Bahamas, much further to the north, but later he decided to make Santo Domingo his administrative headquarters that his brother became involved in. So it was fitting that our expedition sort of linked in with Columbus. And, Columbus was obviously, for his time, one of the great sailors, and was really responsible for, huge economic development in the Age of Discovery, as soon as word got back to Europe that he had made this discovery, then the maritime capitals of Europe started dispatching expeditions to the Americas. So he really did, if you like, kickstart the Age of Discovery. Sadly, his conquistadors and his soldiers also annihilated, hundreds of thousands of ethnic Taino Indians. And what's, I guess, more recognized now, but it hasn't been recognized until very recently, is he was really the grandfather of the North Atlantic or the Caribbean European slave trade. So he, on his second voyage, I think took back 500 slaves, of which 300 died. So I mentioned that for balance. He was clearly a great sailor, and a lot of good things happened because of what he did, but he also, there's a negative balance there too.
So you're saying the first slaves did not come from Africa, they came from the New World to Europe?
Yeah, absolutely. So he took Taino Indians and Arawak Indians, 500 of them, back to Spain and paraded them in Spain. Sadly, 300 of them died on the route back. So he actually started the east to west slave trade. But I mean, obviously cultures have had slaves for thousands of years, and there was slaving going on from West Africa into Europe. But he actually started, if you like, the Caribbean slave trade the other way.
What were the early discoverers hunting for in the New World, or seeking New World? Why do they want to go? First of all, there's the essence of wanting to discover something new, the New World. But what else was there?
I think a lot of the motivation was gold, so and treasures. And in the case of two of the British adventurers, explorers, Drake, for example, he was purely focused on attacking, Spanish treasure ships. I mean, there's a little bit later, but people like Magellan wanted to discover South America. So it was, if you like, raw exploration, new lands, new opportunities, trade, timbers, spices, whatever they could find, really.
But I always wondered, why was there gold in this primitive New World? Where was gold, and who had gold?
Well, of course, the Mayans had a lot of gold. And I mean, Columbus got incredibly close to gold in Panama. And I mean, he went down the sailed down the Central American isthmus, but didn't manage to locate the gold that he so, really craved after. But he came very close to it. So, say the Mayans, Aztecs, and of course, he didn't know it, but in South America, later the Spanish found vast amounts of gold, literally tons and tons of it.
So how did he know? I mean, how would he have known that there was potentially gold there?
He didn't know, and he brutalized the Taino population in the island of Hispaniola, which is modern day modern day Haiti and Dominican Republic. He forced them, and his soldiers forced them to find gold, and there was only very limited amounts of gold, but more gold was found in some of the other islands, Jamaica and Cuba. But basically, he didn't know that there was gold, but in my opinion, he wrongly believed that the gold that was used to build Solomon's temple came from the New World, and therefore that was his search. And there's a great quote that he says that with gold you can achieve anything in this world, including going to heaven. So he was driven by the search for gold.
And it seems so amazing because the Aztecs did have lots of gold.
Yeah, that's right. He got very close to it, but actually he was literally weeks away from finding gold in either Panama or elsewhere, but he never really found the quantities that it was the later conquistadors who found the gold. After we had spent a couple of weeks in the Dominican Republic. We sailed to the west and around Haiti and through the channel between Haiti and Cuba. And there we did meet some very strong headwinds. And although I had gone off watch, the crew tell me that the waves were so big going through that to the channel that for the first time ever, the horse's head actually went underwater and tons of water came on board, or they came onto the deck. They didn't actually get in the hull, but I slept through that and lived to tell the tale, as it were. And but that was probably the worst night. But I did think that had it continued, we might have had to go into Port-au-Prince in Haiti, because it was just such a strong wind. We were making no headway. So we then, after that, managed to get up to Fort Lauderdale. And when we arrived in Fort Lauderdale, I think we were all a bit shocked by the sheer number of super yachts and the great mansions and stuff, because we've been literally eating tinned foods, pasta and dried rice, and been living a pretty meager existence on board the boat. And then to suddenly see all of this incredible scenes. We then arrived at the Coral Ridge Yacht Club, who welcomed us, and we marked sort of official landfall in North America at the Coral Ridge Yacht Club. And this is the team that was on board at that final point.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
This is the route. It's taken us 5 months and 6,000 miles. And we'd done all of the trip certainly from the Canary Islands right across the Dominican Republic without any mechanical assistance. So it's entirely feasible and possible that the Phoenicians could have relatively easily got across the Atlantic. It supports my theory. And I've put all this information together in a book that I've called Atlantic BC. I've not yet quite worked out how it's going to be distributed in the States, but you can read into it what you like, whether the BC is before Columbus, because we arrived in Fort Lauderdale in February 2020, just as the coronavirus was taking hold. But of course, it could also be before Columbus or BC in the traditional sense. But I've put together the story of basically, what the ancients knew, what the evidence for this belief that the Phoenicians came before the Vikings. And you can order it from Atlantic BC, or later on, we'll find a way of, printing it in the States. So it's all finished, it's done. It's just, I got to work out a bit of the distribution. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of the expedition, some of the thinking behind it. And there's more information on the website if anybody wants to follow that up.
Philip Beale, what a wonderful, fascinating story. And congratulations on achieving the kind of quest that young sailor boys dream of, but really don't come close to achieving. Whenever you're in the Bay Area, you must come and visit the yacht club. Remember that everybody who's a Wednesday Yachting Luncheon guest has automatic guest privileges at the yacht club thereafter. So please tell me when you're going to be in town, and we'll take you for a sail on only an 85-year-old sailboat if you go sailing on Youngster on my boat. But it's just a terrific story. Thank you so much for sharing your story of the Phoenicians before Columbus with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. So Philip Beale, on behalf of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, thank you so much. And for the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, this is Ron Young.
been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.